Hello, everyone. I'm Robbie Swale, and this is the 12-Minute Method podcast. And in this podcast, I'm going to be investigating how we can beat procrastination, be more productive, and finally do those things we have been meaning to do. And in season one, what that means is I'm going to be reflecting on a number of things that I mostly first wrote about together in one place in the About the Author section of the 12-Minute Method books, in book one in particular. These are things that over my life I have procrastinated on, thought I might not get done, and then finally done in the end. And in each episode, I'll spend up to 12 minutes reflecting on one of those things and sharing those reflections with you, hoping to identify patterns, things that you can use, ways that you can finally do the things that you've been meaning to do. Welcome to episode number 7 of the 12-Minute Method podcast. I'm going to talk in this one about maintaining a family relationship, particularly in this one with my brother, but also I've noticed it happening with my mum recently as well. But first, as is the custom on the show, I'm going to reflect back on episode 6. But as I do that, I have to reflect a little bit on episode 5, because it's possible I did not give enough credit to my wife, Emma, for her inspiring my Duolingo, or indeed reflect on the fact that if you think my streak is impressive, you should see hers. I think it's on like 2,000 days now or something like that, maybe not quite, but it feels like 1,000,000 days. It's a very impressive streak. So thinking back to episode 6, where I talked about Emma and me getting married, I wanted to pull out a few things. So one is definitely that incisive question move. So that's really important with doing the things that we want to do. So that was the key thing that really helped me see that I did want to get married. I'm not sure how clearly that came across, but it was like I wasn't sure. I just kind of wasn't sure I wanted to get married. I didn't feel like I did. And interestingly, like Emma said, she didn't feel like we'd had lots of conversations about it. Kind of 2 that we could both remember, and I'm sure there were other little ones around it. But I kind of, thinking about it, remembering just in this moment, I'm noticing this feels like absolutely classic, things we want to do but aren't doing thing. Part of it is we have these stories that we're not sure we want to do them. And a lot of that is because we have fears and anxiety and worry and confusion about it. And so for me, in the engagement story, it was like, I don't know how we would get married. I don't know how we'd want to get married. I don't know how to buy an engagement ring. I don't know what I have to do to get engaged, really. I don't know how all those customs work. And that all conspired to make me think, I'm not sure I want to do this. And then we have this great, and this is a common thing, I've seen it with myself and with other people. It's like when I found out from Stephen Pressfield that everyone has resistance, I suddenly didn't have to tell myself the story. I had all these stories that were like, because I feel like this about writing or about doing business, I'm not a writer or a business person. But actually, if every writer and business person feels uncomfortable in this way, maybe I am. And then maybe I can get on with doing what a writer does, which is writing. And so if we can use something like an incisive question, like Vegard used with his client, which inspired me to use it with myself, then we can move through that and we can see more clearly what we do want to do underneath. But it's also really common that we have assumptions that we have to do something, X in this case, like know about how to get engaged before we do the thing, before we get started, right? And that is just not true. And so the key incisive question is, if you knew you couldn't ever do X, then what? And that's the question Vegard asked. And for me, it was, if I had already done X, actually, what would I do? And it's like, well, then we would be married, and that would be perfect, and I would love that. And then I know what I want to do, and then I just have to do it. I noticed, I once got asked by a friend of mine called Chris Joseph. He asked me, what have you learned about time management and productivity? And one of the key lessons, it was a great question. He just asked me off the cuff in a conversation. He's a great coach, and so he asks great questions. And I wrote an article about it somewhere, but one of the lessons I realized was be humble about the fact that we have to do silly things to get ourselves to do difficult things. And I always feel like I should be smart enough to not have to do silly things in order to do the difficult things. Like I shouldn't have to, I've just saw my phone come up with a WhatsApp alert. It was sitting on my desk. So I've just thrown it onto the bed. I'm working in recording this in one of the bedrooms in our flat. And like, I shouldn't have to do that, right? I feel like I should be smart enough to not get distracted by things, but I'm not. Like, I'm just not, and no one is. And so it's worth doing those things. And in the story, the engagement story, I have to be humble. I have to book it in my diary. And then I have to be humble to know that if I just book it in my diary, I might move it until I book my sister in to come and meet me at that time in my diary. And that's help to, and humility to do, in speech marks, silly things in order to do something important and make sure I don't avoid it for all kinds of reasons. Because like all these things that we want to do but aren't doing, one of the reasons for that is because we'll have to change and grow to do them. For me to be someone who gets engaged, I'll have to have the courage to ask, risk the rejection. For me to be someone who gets married, I'll have to make a promise, a permanent promise, a forever promise, pretty much the only forever promise that we make in modern society. I'll have to make that in front of the people that are most important to me, in front of, God, in this case, in a church, but it might be in front of, in the law, in a registry office, or with a celebrant of some kind. And, that's not nothing. That requires me to change. Requires me to make a promise for the rest of my life, which I haven't made in any other way. Nothing else, a mortgage, even a child isn't really that. And so that requires you to grow, and that's scary. And to do a scary thing that requires us to grow, we have to help ourselves do that. And then there was a couple of things that I just wanted to say about the final piece I talked about, which is about marriage. And, it made me really think that in how to create the conditions for great work, which will be out really soon, as this podcast episode comes out, the third 12-minute method book. There's a chapter in there called Love is a Transformational Practice, written just after we got married, Emma and I. When I was reading it back as part of the editing process, I, brought tears to my eyes because of the impact that relationship has had on me, even before we got married. And just the power of being loved. And of loving somebody else, and how it transforms us. Transforms what we're capable of, the appreciation we can receive from somebody, makes so many things possible. So I'm very grateful for that, for the way that Emma has supported me and made so much of what I do possible. And it can't be overstated, really, that thing, and how amazing she's been for me in this business, supporting me to do this work in so many ways. And also, it made me think about commitment and things like the 12-minute practice, and how making promises, public promises, in the case of marriage, is very powerful. It lets people know what we are about. And it means they know when to help us if they think things might be going wrong. And it helps us in the dark times know what to do, because we've made this promise, and it is a big deal to break that promise. And, this is a much deeper way of doing it, and about a much deeper thing, but it's not that dissimilar to me saying I have a weekly writing practice. People know the promise you've made, and you know the promise you've made. It's a lot easier to keep that promise than if you have a vague thing, which is kind of, we are together for, because we love each other, we're going to live together. Without that promise, like, what is really going on? And with any habit, we have. Sometimes I exercise. It's like, how do you keep to that habit? How do you know what you've promised to yourself? You have to make it clear. So I wanted to say that as well. Okay. Let's set the timer. I've just rolled to 13 minutes. We can't have that, can we? Okay. So, episode 7. This is about my relationship with my brother, and how we speak now more regularly than we have ever spoken, probably, apart from when we were really little. And this is one of those things where once I'd seen the 12-minute method pattern, I realized we were doing it. I was like, oh, that's cool. We have to keep this up. But in a way, the first time I thought about family relationships, and quite a few of these things that are a part of the 12-minute method, they're like, what will you wish you had started doing 5 years ago? That's a great like 12-minute method question. That's a great thing to build a 12-minute practice on. I was on the Wait But Why blog, and check that out. There's a piece, I can't even remember how to describe it, but it's like this guy realized that he was partway through, like he was thinking about how many Super Bowls he would have left in his life and how many of them he'd had and what percentage he was through the number of Super Bowls he'd have. But also he thought about the number of Chinese dumplings he'd had and how far he was through that. But I think that the thing that brought it up for him, I think the guy's called Tim Urban, unless I'm confusing it with somebody else. If I remember, I'll put a link in the show notes. Let me write it down. To this, because it's cool. He had a graphic, basically, which showed how many dumplings he had left, and how many Super Bowls and things like that. But it started from the amount of time he would spend with his parents in his life and how distributed that was. And of course, we spend a lot of time with our parents and our siblings when we all live together, if we're lucky enough to do that in a house in our childhood. And then after that, we see our parents occasionally, often. If some people live near their parents, some people are happy with that, right? But some people won't be. And it's extraordinary when you think about it, how most of the time I have spent with my parents has already happened. Because we spent so much time together in the first 18 years of my life. And then there was one other year when I was a bit older that I lived back at home. Most of the time that we spent together in our life was spent together then. And that's, for some of us, a strange prospect. And some people, when they saw that thing, found it depressing. I think that's a pretty naive way to look at it, right? Because we will die. Like, that's an undeniable. It's much more useful to think about that and think, well, therefore, how should we live? And it's just factual that probably we spent more time with our parents and our siblings than we would in our first part of our life, if we're over the age of 20, than we will in the rest of our lives. And because, like, no number of Christmases that we might have will add up to a year of living at home with our parents. And so that had me thinking about this. And then what was interesting happened. By accident, my brother and I set up a 12-minute method to strengthen the relationship of two brothers. So my brother and I are half brothers, which meant that he lived in Sheffield with his mum and I lived in another part of Yorkshire with my mum and our dad. And most of the time. And we had a great relationship growing up. He would come every other weekend and we were never on top of each other in the way that siblings are. So we didn't fight that much or ever really. And we, in a way, he was my best friend for a long time growing up. And then when he became a teenager and he got a job and a girlfriend, he came a bit less and we saw each other a bit less. And then we over time, we didn't stay in touch. We weren't in touch that well. Of course, we spoke on ICQ and MSN Messenger. And then he moved to the Netherlands. And again, it's like we stayed in touch and we saw each other at Christmas and family holidays and things like that. And we always got on well. And then for some reason, in late 2018, he said, I'm thinking of doing the marketing seminar, which is a Seth Godin online program run by his company Akimbo, or has been up to this point. I think it's just splintered off. Do you want to do it with me? It'd be a great way for us to connect. And I think it'd be really good. Something like that, he said. And I said yes in the end. And I'm glad I did. It created a lot of possibility for me, that program. And we decided as part of that we would have a meeting. Robbie and Ewan, that's his name, Ewan Townhead. You can Google him and find his writing, which was a real inspiration to me in lots of ways when I was starting out as a coach and starting out with my writing practice. And in fact, when you read back older pieces of me, I can really hear Ewan's writing in what I write sometimes. It's a bit less now. I've kind of found my voice a bit more. But he's a beautiful writer. Taught me a lot about money, taught me a lot about business. And so we set up these calls, these weekly calls on Tuesday mornings, we found in the end, and we put a recurring thing in the diary to talk about the marketing seminar. And we've been doing that ever since. And I reckon Ewan said he thinks we have a kind of more than 90% success rate. That was at the start of 2019. And we're now in the so we've probably been doing it for at least 3.5 years of weekly Zoom calls. And It's like we didn't set out to have it. This is why it reminds me of the 12-minute method, right? I didn't set out to write, to have written a blog for 6 years. I just started, did it every week, and now I've been doing it for 6 years, and I've got 80,000 words. Or 6 years, I've probably got 160,000 words. I had 80,000 words after 3 years. Now, we didn't set out to do it. We set out to talk about the marketing seminar, and then when we both kind of did the marketing seminar in different ways, and we talked about it a bit, but we just liked also talking about each other, our other work, our families, football, all the important things in life. We kept it going. And then I think we started to get a feel for, we're now talking more than we've talked ever as adults. And that's valuable. And that's the Tim Urban thing, right? It may not like a weekly call. That feels that's enough for me and you, and to feel really close and to be supporting each other in lots of ways. And so, what's interesting is about that time, actually, my sister moved away from London. So over the before that, I'd definitely seen her more. So by meeting up for coffees occasionally, by hanging out with each other in all kinds of different ways, I would see my sister more than I would speak to my brother. And then she moved away from London, and we didn't set up a weekly call. Of course we didn't, because most people don't have that with their family. Although I would recommend that you do. It's really amazing thing to do, and it feels very meaningful to me. So now I speak to my brother far more than my sister for the first time ever, really. And not that that's a good thing, but it's it shows the power of a weekly call. And I speak to my brother more than I speak to my parents. In fact, I speak to my brother more than I speak to anyone who doesn't live in my house, through just speaking to him once a week, right? For an hour. It's not much, but it's significant for me. And what I've noticed, and what's interesting is we're trying to change it at the moment. This is the thing that occurs to me as we're doing this. Ewan's tried this a couple of times. He said, "Can we move it to a different time? We do it on a Tuesday morning. He's on European time, so it's 9 o'clock for me, 10 o'clock for him. It's not as convenient for him as it is for me anymore. His work pattern's changed a bit. He's tried to move it, and we failed. And I'm really glad when we tried to move it, we didn't stop the Tuesday morning slot. Because if we'd stopped the Tuesday morning slot the first time he said it was a bit inconvenient, we might have failed to set up what'll probably be a Tuesday afternoon or a Wednesday afternoon slot. And then we'd have stopped the habit. And that would have been a real shame. And so we've kept it going, but I need to move it now. We're getting to that point. And it's these times, I've written this elsewhere before, right? Resistance can't cope with the discipline. And where procrastination thrives is when we change our habit. It's when we get injured. That's when our exercise habit stops. Or we go on holiday. When we come back, we don't recommit to the great habits we had, the great practices we had before we went away. So I'm aware of that lingering. But because of this, what's interesting is I now kind of have the same thing with my mum, and a bit by knock-on effect my dad, which is that I have Mondays with my daughter. And again, this is not unconnected. It's in the long term, will I be glad or not that I spent a day a week looking after my daughter, even though it has financial costs? It's not easy. It's kind of harder than work. Actually, especially when she was little, it's getting easier now that she's more of a person. She's kind of nearly 2, and we have a lot of fun together now. But when she was a little baby, it was quite hard, really hard, much harder than a day of work. And so that's partly there for the same reason, right? It's in the long term, this is a habit. Is it enough? Yeah, it feels about enough for me to have one day a week with her. It's good for me. It's good for her. And I think it's good for her. And that's there. And then one of the things we do on Monday is we call Grandma. And we have an hour or so with Grandma every Monday afternoon, at least. And I'm aware that that's the same thing. It's not quite the same thing, 'cause it's not time with just me and my mum connecting, but it's time my mum gets with her granddaughter. It's time my mum gets with her son. I get with my mum. Leah gets with Grandma. And it has an echo of my call with Ewan. And because we get Dad a bit in there, then that's great as well. But I noticed it when I talked to my dad recently, just me and him, or we had a little call, or maybe some WhatsApp voice notes. It's it's not the same. And so it's when I do a good thing, like with my brother, it makes other good things, like talking to my mum, talking to my dad, spending time with Leah, more likely to happen, because I see them more clearly. And that's happened to me with the writing practice. When you have one practice that you keep up, you see the possibility of the practice. And I know now that it's quite likely that me and Ewan will keep this going potentially forever, because we've been doing it for 3.5 years. We're becoming brothers that speak every week. And that, once your identity becomes being the person that speaks to their brother every week, if we don't do that now, it'll get weird for us, rather than before it was weird when we did speak. Not weird, but just like unusual. What's interesting is I think it used to be easier. I used to call my, one of my best friends, Steve. I would just call him when I was walking around London, or I'd call my sister, call my mum. That used to happen more. Because we're not walking around as much after COVID, that doesn't happen as much. Also, because calling people is has become a bit weird, even though I think we can break that stigma. Is there anything else that's important about this? I guess it's just that, we're thinking again, it's like, I do quite a lot of work thinking with my clients, sometimes thinking about what will make you sad at the end of your life. And one of the things that regularly comes up is a relationship with close family members. It's not always there, because not everyone has that, or not everyone doesn't do it already, right? Some people call their mum or their dad every week, and that's fantastic. I envy those people that do it. And so now I'm glad that there are a couple of ways that I am connecting with my family on a regular basis. And what are the way, if we work out what we'd be sad about at the end of our life, then what we have to do is turn that into a commitment for us to live into. So if I would be sad that I haven't spoken to my brother enough, there's the timer, I have to change that into, I am a commitment to speaking to my brother enough. And I have to think about that, and I have to say it to myself. And when I say it to myself, that brings it into my awareness. And when it brings into my awareness, I see the possibilities and the solutions to that challenge. So I've loved exploring that with you. It's made connections for me that I didn't have before. I'll be back next time to talk about something slightly different, maybe the books. But in the meantime, I hope this gives you some ideas for creating more connection with family, and doing other things that you want to do. Okay, just a couple more things before you head out to whatever else you've got going on in the rest of your day. If you want to find out a bit more about me or sign up to my mailing list, you can do that at www.robbieswale.com. If you want to read the 12-Minute Method books, you can find out more about them on my website. You can find them on Amazon, and you can find them in lots of other bookshops and booksellers around the world. You might want to come and join the 12-Minute Method Facebook group. You can find that by searching for the 12-Minute Method on Facebook, or there's links on my website. And you can find some other people there who are interested in doing work that matters to them and finally doing the things that they want to do. You can find me on lots of social media platforms. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so you might want to find me there. And most of all, I'd love to hear from you, especially if something that I've made has inspired you to finally do something you've been meaning to do for a long time. Hearing those stories are some of the most meaningful things for me in my work. And so they help me keep going when I might want to give up. So I'd love to hear from you. But most of all, I'd love it if you did that thing that matters to you, that you've been meaning to do.